My name is Brittany, and I was working in the marketing department at Carson and Associates when our paths crossed. David worked in sales, just down the hall from my office. It started innocently enough. We kept running into each other in the office kitchen during lunch breaks. I'd heat up my sad microwave meals while he'd unpack his perfectly organized bento boxes. "Those look way better than my frozen dinners," I said one day, eyeing his colorful lunch spread. He grinned and pulled out an extra set of chopsticks. "Want to try?" My mom taught me how to cook, though I'm pretty sure she regrets it now. I stopped falling for her special recipes pretty quickly. That first shared lunch turned into daily lunch dates. We'd sit at the small table by the window, trading stories about our lives. I told him about growing up with my sensible parents in the suburbs, about my grandmother who'd gifted me my apartment before she passed away. He talked about his work, his hobbies, his dreams, but rarely about his family. After 3 months of lunches, he finally asked me out properly. "Dinner tonight? Somewhere that doesn't have a microwave or plastic cutlery?" I said yes, and that's how our real story began. We dated for a year, and it was wonderful. David was thoughtful, funny, and kind. When he suggested moving in together, it made perfect sense. My apartment had plenty of space, and we were spending most nights together anyway. Everything was perfect, except for one thing: I'd never met his family. He'd met mine within the first few months of dating. But whenever I brought up meeting his family, David would change the subject or make vague excuses. One night, after we'd been living together for a few months, I finally confronted him about it. We were curled up on the couch, watching a movie, when I paused it and turned to face him. "David, why haven't I met your family yet? Are you ashamed of me or something?" He let out a heavy sigh, running his hands through his dark hair. "God, no, Britt. I'm not ashamed of you, I'm ashamed of them." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Come on, they can't be that bad." "They are." His voice was dead serious. "They're different. They think everything is a joke, and I mean everything. Even important moments, serious situations, they turn everything into some kind of cruel prank." I remember raising my eyebrows, still not quite believing him. "What do you mean? You want examples? Fine." He sat up straighter, his jaw tense. "When I was in high school, I had my first girlfriend over for dinner. My mom served spaghetti, but she'd replaced the noodles with rubber worms. My date screamed and threw up at the table. Everyone thought it was hilarious, except me and Sarah. She never spoke to me again." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. "Or how about when I had a big presentation in middle school? My brother replaced my notebook with an identical one filled with pornographic drawings. When I opened it in front of the class." He shook his head. "I got suspended for 2 weeks." As he continued sharing stories from his childhood, each one worse than the last, I began to understand why he'd been so hesitant to introduce me to his family. But I had no idea that I was about to become their next target. David proposed on a Tuesday. Nothing fancy, just the two of us in our kitchen, making breakfast. He pulled out a ring while I was flipping pancakes, and said, "I can't imagine my life without you, Britt. Will you marry me?" Of course, I said yes. And then, inevitably, came the words I'd been both dreading and curious about: "I guess it's time for you to meet my family." The Thompson family home was a charming 2-story colonial in the suburbs. Mrs. Thompson opened the door before we even reached the porch. She was a petite woman with David's warm brown eyes and a wide smile. Mr. Thompson stood behind her, tall and distinguished looking, and next to him was James, David's older brother. "Oh, finally!" Mrs. Thompson pulled me into a tight hug. We'd been dying to meet the woman who stole our David's heart. The initial conversation was surprisingly normal. We sat in their cozy living room, and they asked about my job, my family, how David and I met. They even cracked a few harmless jokes that made me laugh. I started to relax, thinking David had exaggerated their pranking tendencies. I caught him watching his family warily, like someone waiting for a bomb to explode. I thought he was being paranoid. "I'll get us some tea," Mrs. Thompson announced cheerfully. "Brittany, dear, how do you take yours?" "Just a splash of milk, please." When she returned with the tea tray, everyone was still chatting pleasantly. I took a big sip of my tea and immediately regretted it. My mouth exploded with salt and pepper, so much pepper it felt like I'd swallowed fire. I spat the tea back into the cup, but it was too late. My throat was burning. Tears streamed down my face as I coughed and gasped. The Thompsons burst into laughter. "Welcome to the family," James hooted. "Better get used to it, we love our little jokes." "That's how we show love here," Mr. Thompson added, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. I ran to the kitchen, desperately searching for water. I found a glass and filled it with ice and water, drinking it in huge gulps. The pepper had made my nose run, and I could feel my carefully applied makeup streaming down my face along with my tears. From the living room, I could hear David's angry whispers, "What is wrong with you people? This isn't funny. She's going to be my wife." "Oh, lighten up," James replied. "It's just a joke." When I walked back into the living room, my face a mess of running mascara and smeared foundation, they took one look at me and started laughing again. "Look, she looks like a panda," James pointed at me, doubling over with laughter. That was the last straw for David. He jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. "You're all jerks. This is exactly why I didn't want to bring her here." He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the door. In the car, David apologized over and over. I just hugged him, my face still burning from the pepper and humiliation. As we drove home, I realized David hadn't been exaggerating about his family at all. He'd been warning me. Planning a wedding is stressful enough, without having to worry about your future in-laws turning it into a practical joke playground. David and I spent weeks debating whether to invite his family at all. "We have to invite them," David finally said one night while we were addressing invitations. "They're still my parents, and no matter how much I hate their pranks, I'd regret not having them there." He called them the next day, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear. "Mom, Dad, listen carefully," his voice was stern. "You can come to the wedding, but I need your word, no pranks. This is the most important day of our lives, not a circus." "Of course, sweetheart," his mother chirped. "We'll behave, I promise." The day of the wedding started perfectly. The ceremony was beautiful, and during the reception, everything was going smoothly. David's family was actually behaving themselves, though I noticed David watching them like a hawk. Then came time for the cake cutting. Our cake was gorgeous, 4 tiers of white fondant with delicate sugar flowers cascading down the sides. But something was off. There were candles on it, lit candles. That wasn't part of our plan. I turned to David to mention it, but before I could get the words out, there was a loud pop. Then another, and another. The cake suddenly exploded, sending chunks of white cake and frosting flying everywhere. Most of it landed on me, completely ruining my wedding dress. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard it, the familiar sound of the Thompsons' laughter. They were practically falling over themselves, pointing and howling with glee. "Your face," James gasped between laughs. "Oh my God, your face." I stood there, cake dripping down my dress, and burst into tears. Through my blurred vision, I saw David's face turn purple with rage. "Get out," he roared at his family. "Get out of my wedding right now." "You're overreacting," his mother said, looking bewildered. "Everyone loves a good wedding prank." David didn't respond. Instead, he waved over the security team we'd hired, thank God for that decision, and had them escort his family out. My mother rushed over with napkins, trying to clean frosting off my face. My bridesmaids surrounded me protectively. Even David's Aunt Clara, who I'd just met that day, came over to help, shooting disgusted looks at her departing relatives. "I can't believe they're my brother's family," she muttered, helping to wipe cake from my hair. This is a wedding, for heaven's sake, not a college fraternity party. Somehow, we salvaged the rest of the reception. Our friends and my family rallied around us, turning it into a joke we were all in on, rather than one at my expense. Someone found a backup cake. Apparently, our wedding planner had dealt with difficult families before, and we even managed to get some decent pictures taken after I changed into my backup dress. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm after the wedding disaster. David and I enjoyed our quiet existence in my grandmother's old apartment, far from his family's chaos. We transformed the spare bedroom into a home office, planning to use it that way for a few years, before maybe turning it into a nursery. But plans change. Just over a year after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. David was overjoyed, spinning me around our kitchen when I told him, though he quickly put me down when I turned green. We decided to keep it to ourselves for the first few months, telling only my parents. Somehow, though, news travels. I was 7 months along when David's phone rang one evening. "Your mother?" I asked, recognizing his expression. He nodded. "They know about the baby. Mom's insisting they have a right to meet their grandchild." I instinctively put my hands over my swollen belly. "No pranks around the baby," I said firmly. "Absolutely none," David agreed before answering the phone. When Emma was born, she was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and David's warm brown eyes. We managed to keep the Thompsons away for the first 2 months, but their persistence wore us down. Just one visit, David negotiated with them. At our apartment, where we control the environment. And if there's even a hint of a prank, you're out forever. They came on a Sunday afternoon. I watched them like a hawk as they cooed over Emma, looking for any sign of mischief. But they were surprisingly normal. Mrs. Thompson cradled Emma gently, tears in her eyes. Mr. Thompson proudly showed us pictures of his own father holding David as a baby. That visit led to others. They'd come over every few weeks, bringing appropriate gifts and behaving themselves. Still, I never fully relaxed around them. I refused every dinner invitation, remembering the pepper tea incident all too well. During one of their visits, while David was changing Emma's diaper, Mrs. Thompson started chatting about James. "Oh, he got married last month," she mentioned casually. "Such a small ceremony. Just at the courthouse. His Caroline refused to have a proper wedding." She shook her head disapprovingly. "I don't understand why." I bit my tongue to keep from saying, "Really? You don't understand why?" Instead, I just nodded, thinking about my own ruined wedding dress and exploding cake. I had a pretty good idea why Caroline opted for a courthouse ceremony, and honestly, I wished I'd done the same. In my head, I could imagine exactly how that conversation had gone between James and Caroline. She'd probably heard the stories about my wedding, or maybe she'd been subject to a few harmless pranks herself. Either way, smart girl, she'd found a way to avoid giving them any opportunity for their special brand of humor. Life has a way of shattering when you least expect it. One rainy Tuesday morning, David kissed Emma goodbye before school, kissed me goodbye before work, and walked out our door for the last time. A drunk driver ran a red light at 9:17 a.m. By 9:20, I was a widow. Emma didn't understand at first. She was only 7, too young to fully grasp the concept of never coming back. When I told her Daddy had died, she asked if he'd be home for dinner. Each time she asked, my heart broke all over again. The days leading up to the funeral passed in a blur. My mother practically moved in, handling arrangements, while I sat in a daze on the couch, holding Emma. I couldn't cry anymore. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me. The Thompsons came to the funeral with James and his wife Caroline. I barely registered their presence until it was time for the eulogies. I'd already spoken, sharing memories of David as a husband and father, his kindness, his gentle humor, how he'd taught Emma to ride her bike just last month. Then his parents stood up to speak. "David always loved a good joke," Mr. Thompson began, and I felt my stomach clench. "Remember when he was 5, and we convinced him his teddy bear had come alive and eaten all his Halloween candy? Mrs. Thompson chimed in with a laugh. Or that time in college when we sent him a fake acceptance letter to medical school, even though he never applied? His face was priceless. The church was silent. No one laughed. I looked around and saw faces twisted in disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. Emma clutched my hand, confused. And now he's up there, Mr. Thompson continued, grinning, probably planning the ultimate prank on St. Peter. I felt something snap inside me. My whole body started shaking with rage. Emma must have felt it because she looked up at me with worried eyes. After the service, while people were gathering for the reception, I approached the Thompsons. My voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "How dare you?" I hissed. "How dare you turn my husband's funeral into a joke?" "Oh, Brittany," Mrs. Thompson reached for my arm. David would have appreciated the humor. He always did. I jerked away from her touch. No, he tolerated it. What you do is cruel and thoughtless. I never want to see any of you again. You're not welcome in our lives anymore. Emma and I are done with all of you. But we're family, Mrs. Thompson protested, finally looking concerned. No, I said firmly. We're not. Family doesn't humiliate each other. Family doesn't ruin weddings or mock funerals. We're done. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, probably still wondering what they'd done wrong. They'd never understood, and they never would. 5 years passed like a blur. Emma grew from a grieving 7-year-old into a thoughtful 12-year-old who had her father's kind eyes and gentle spirit. I threw myself into being both mother and father, trying to fill the David-shaped hole in our lives. We heard bits and pieces about the Thompsons through the grapevine. James had 2 kids now. I'd seen pictures on social media of 2 boys with his mischievous grin. I always quickly scrolled past, determined to keep that chapter of our lives firmly closed. Sometimes Emma would ask about them, especially around holidays or when her friends talked about their grandparents. I never told her about the exploding wedding cake or the funeral jokes. She had enough complicated feelings about losing her dad without adding that mess to it. Then came the phone call, 3 days before Christmas. "Brittany?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was older, softer somehow. "Please don't hang up." I almost did anyway, but Emma was sitting next to me on the couch, working on her homework. She looked up, curious. "We miss Emma," Mrs. Thompson continued. "And you. Please, would you consider spending Christmas with us? The whole family will be there, James and Caroline, their boys. We'd love to see you both." I started to say no, but Emma, who had obviously figured out who was calling, began nodding enthusiastically. Her eyes were pleading. "There will be absolutely no pranks," I said firmly. "No jokes, no tricks, nothing like that. Just a normal Christmas dinner." "We promise," Mr. Thompson's voice joined in. They must have been on speakerphone. "We swear on David's memory. No pranks." Maybe it was the mention of David, or maybe it was Emma's hopeful face, but I found myself agreeing. "We'll come," I said. "But I mean it about the pranks." After hanging up, Emma and I went shopping. If we were doing this, we were doing it right. We picked out top-of-the-line kitchen appliances for the Thompsons, the latest tablet for James and Caroline, and the season's hottest toys for their boys. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa got me something nice?" Emma asked as we wrapped the gifts. "I'm sure they did, sweetheart," I said, hoping I wasn't lying. "They've had 5 years to think about it." Emma threw herself into choosing wrapping paper and writing cards. I watched her excitement grow and prayed I wasn't making a horrible mistake by letting the Thompsons back into our lives. The Thompson house looked exactly the same as I remembered it, decorated with twinkling Christmas lights and a wreath on the door. Emma squeezed my hand as we walked up the path, our arms full of carefully wrapped presents. James and his family were already there when we arrived. His wife Caroline gave me a warm, almost apologetic smile as she helped us with our coats. Their boys, Mike and Tommy, hovered shyly behind their parents. The gift-giving started promisingly. Emma and I handed out our presents, and the reactions seemed genuine. Mrs. Thompson teared up over the expensive coffee maker, Mr. Thompson was thrilled with his new tablet, and the boys' faces lit up at their gaming consoles. Then came our turn. Mrs. Thompson handed Emma a wrapped box with a big smile, while Mr. Thompson passed me a similar one. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped hers, her first gift from her grandparents in 5 years. I'll never forget the look on her face when she opened that box. Inside was a plastic toy designed to look like dog poop, along with some clearly marked down items from the clearance bin. Emma's lower lip quivered as she stared at the contents. The laughter started immediately. Mr. Thompson and James were practically howling. Even the boys joined in, pointing at Emma's face. "Oh my God, look at them," James gasped between laughs. "Their expressions are priceless." My own box contained similar junk, expired candy, and items that still had clearance stickers on them. "That's enough," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Where are the real presents?" Mrs. Thompson wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "What do you mean? Those are the presents." "You can't be serious." I looked at each of them. "You haven't seen your granddaughter in 5 years, and you give her fake dog poop as a Christmas present?" They exchanged confused looks. "It's funny," Mr. Thompson insisted. "Come on, Brittany, learn to take a joke." I watched a tear roll down Emma's cheek, and something snapped inside me. Without a word, I stood up and walked over to Mike and Tommy. "I'm sorry, boys," I said, taking back the gaming consoles. "But these are returning to the store." "Mom," they wailed as I moved on to James and Caroline, collecting the tablet and other gifts. "Brittany, this is cruel," Mrs. Thompson protested as I took back their presents too. "Cruel?" I turned on her. "You gave a 12-year-old girl who lost her father fake dog poop for Christmas, and you're calling me cruel?" "It was just a joke," James started, but I cut him off. "We're leaving, Emma," I said. "Get your coat." The drive home was quiet. Emma stared out the window, clutching her empty gift bag. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I finally said. "I really thought they'd changed." "It's okay, Mom," she replied softly. "Can we watch Christmas movies and make hot chocolate when we get home?" "Of course we can. We'll have our own Christmas, just us two." And that's exactly what we did. We spent the rest of Christmas Day in our pajamas, watching holiday movies, baking cookies, and trying to forget about the Thompsons and their idea of humor. The day after Christmas, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw James's post. "Terrible Christmas yesterday. My sister-in-law showed her true colors, cruelly taking back Christmas presents from my crying children. Some people just don't understand family traditions and humor. My poor boys were heartbroken. Bad aunt, Christmas ruined." The comments flooded in immediately. "How horrible. What kind of person takes presents from children? She sounds toxic." My hands were shaking as I typed my response. "Let me tell you what really happened at Christmas yesterday." "You want to talk about cruel? Let me tell you about your family traditions. After 5 years of no contact, your parents gave their only granddaughter, a 12-year-old girl who lost her father, a toy that mimics dog feces as a Christmas present. They gave me clearance bin items with price tags still attached. Then they laughed at our pain. But this isn't new behavior. Let me tell you all about my wedding day, where they rigged our wedding cake to explode in my face. Or about my husband's funeral, where they thought it was appropriate to turn their son's eulogy into a stand-up comedy routine about pranking him as a child. You want to talk about toxic family traditions? Let's talk." I hit post and waited. Within minutes, other relatives started chiming in. "Oh God, remember Cousin Sarah's graduation? They replaced her diploma with a joke certificate during the photo op. They put laxatives in the punch at my baby shower. They ruined my son's bar mitzvah with that trick Torah scroll." The tide turned quickly. Soon, James's original post was flooded with people sharing their own stories of the Thompsons' pranks. Caroline, James's wife, even liked several of the comments. The phone call started that evening. First James. Brittany, I never thought about it like that. Reading everyone's stories. God, we've been awful, haven't we? Then Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. We never meant to hurt anyone, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice shaking. We thought everyone was laughing with us. We thought it was all in good fun. We've always been this way, Mr. Thompson added. It's how we show love. But maybe we've been showing it wrong. I took a deep breath. You have to understand, your pranks aren't funny. They're cruel. They hurt people. They hurt your granddaughter. We see that now, Mrs. Thompson whispered. Can you ever forgive us? I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm glad you're finally realizing how your behavior affects others, but I can't just forget everything that's happened. 2 days later, a delivery truck brought a large package. Inside was the latest iPhone, the exact one Emma had been dreaming about, along with a heartfelt letter of apology from her grandparents. I sent James's boys their gaming consoles back, with a note, everyone deserves a real Christmas. Now, 6 months later, we have a cautious peace. We meet occasionally for coffee or lunch in neutral places. The Thompsons are trying, really trying, to change. No more pranks, no more cruel jokes. Emma video chats with her cousins sometimes, and I've seen genuine remorse in my in-laws' eyes. David would be proud of this progress, I think. He always hoped his family would understand someday. Maybe they finally do.